In the summer of 1953, a storm was brewing in the streets of Tehran. But this wasn't a revolution led by the people. It was a revolution bought and paid for by two of the world's most powerful intelligence agencies. This is the story of how the CIA and MI6 overthrew Iran's democracy and why the world chose to forget it. Imagine a democratic nation in the heart of the Middle East, free elections, a popular leader, and the hope of a brighter future. Now imagine that same nation crushed by foreign powers in secret, all in the name of oil and Cold War politics. This actually happened. The year was 1953. The target? Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh. The operation codenamed Ajax. The players, the CIA, MI6, and a monarch clinging to power, the Shah of Iran. In the aftermath of World War II, Iran was standing at a crossroads. Its land was rich with oil, but the wealth flowed in only one direction, westward. For decades, the British-controlled Anglo-Iranian oil company, now known as BP, extracted billions in profits from Iran's oil fields, while the Iranian people lived in poverty. Enter Mohammad Mossadegh. Educated, charismatic and deeply committed to Iranian sovereignty, Mossadegh was elected as Prime Minister in 1951 with overwhelming public support. His boldest move? Nationalizing the country's oil industry. It was a direct challenge to British imperial power, and Britain was furious. But instead of negotiating, they turned to sabotage, boycotts, blockades, and covert pressure. Still, Mossadegh stood firm. To the Iranian people, he was a national hero. To Britain, a threat that had to be eliminated. Unable to topple Mossadegh on their own, British intelligence approached their Cold War ally, the United States. At first, the Americans hesitated. Mossadegh wasn't a communist. In fact, he was a secular nationalist. But Cold War paranoia ran deep, and Britain knew exactly what buttons to push. They warned the US that Iran might fall into Soviet hands, that Mossadegh was soft on communism, that the oil might end up in enemy control. It worked. In 1953, newly elected US President Dwight D. Eisenhower approved a plan that would change the Middle East forever, Operation Ajax. The mission was simple: overthrow Mossadegh and reinstall the Shah as an absolute monarch. Leading the operation was Kermit Roosevelt Jr., the grandson of President Theodore Roosevelt and a senior CIA operative. He arrived in Tehran with a suitcase full of cash and a plan to plunge the country into chaos. Here's how they did it. CIA and MI6 agents bribed military officers, bought off newspapers, and paid local thugs to stage riots and demonstrations. They flooded the media with lies, calling Mossadegh a communist, an atheist, a dictator. Fake protests erupted across Tehran. Some demanded the return of the Shah. Others shouted slogans written in CIA offices. Chaos spread. At one point, the coup actually failed, and the Shah fled the country in fear. But Roosevelt refused to give up. He regrouped, poured more money into the streets, and on August the 19th, 1953, pro-Shah forces stormed government buildings. Mossadegh was arrested. The Shah returned in triumph and began a brutal 26-year reign with the full support of the West. What followed was decades of repression. The Shah ruled Iran with an iron fist backed by American weapons and oil money. He created a feared secret police force, SAVAK, that hunted down political dissidents, tortured prisoners, and silenced opposition. The dream of democracy was buried under fear, but not forgotten. In 1979, the Iranian people rose up again, this time in the Islamic Revolution. The Shah was overthrown. Iran became a theocracy. and US-Iran relations collapsed. But many historians agree the seeds of that revolution were planted in 1953. So why does this story matter today? Because it was the first US-backed coup of the Cold War, and it set a dangerous precedent. What happened in Iran would later happen in Guatemala, Chile, Congo, and more. Democracy was sacrificed again and again in the name of stability, oil, and fear. And for the Iranian people, it created a deep and lasting mistrust of the West, a mistrust that still shapes geopolitics today. What would the Middle East look like today if Iran's democracy had been allowed to grow? Would there have been an Islamic revolution? Would Iran and the US be allies instead of enemies? We may never know. But we must remember, if you found this story compelling, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to History Pulse, where we bring the forgotten truths of the past back to life. And let us know in the comments, do you think the West had the right to interfere in Iran's politics in the name of oil and anti-communism? Or was it a mistake that changed the world for the worse? Let's talk history.